mute, it just tries to avoid the background noise. If you've got questions as we go through, there will be sections for questions, and potentially we can sort of open the floor up to people to ask their own and to have a conversation. But in the short term, if there's a burning question, if you write it in the chat, which can be found on your screen, generally running along the bottom, and just type it in, and myself and Fidelity are just going to be monitoring them, and I'll bring them in as appropriate. So we're sort of splitting into sort of starting around topping, thinking about the sort of winter time and the more challenging times of trying to get sheep all the way through on grass and forage. And then we'll also sort of think from lambing onwards. So that's the sort of structure we're going through. Harriet's going to take us through quite a bit of it, and then we'll come back and do some more farmer chat. So that's what we're going to be up to this afternoon, whichever you wish to choose. And but to begin with, I'll just hand over Fidelity, and she'll just take you through the standards that we're going to really be talking through this evening.
Thank you very much, Liz. And thank you very much for chairing this meeting. I should just say to everybody that we're really pleased that Liz has joined the board as the director to bring her very commercial perspective to livestock production. We decided to do a few webinars or meetings, however you like to call this, because it is done as a meeting form when we hope we'll have chat at the end, on sheep, because we often neglect them when we're talking about Pasture for Life. So tonight the idea is that we've picked 2 members, and we're really focusing on rotational grazing with sheep. When we put the idea out, quite a few members wrote in with lots of different systems, but so we felt we'll probably do some other webinars in due course, but this one specifically on rotational grazing. So just to really set the scene quite quickly, I just wanted to go through and pick out just a few of the PFLA standards, the Pasture for Life standards that affect sheep, just to sort of set the scene. There's lots more. They're public document. They're on our website, so you can look them up yourselves at any time. But this will just give you a few sort of pointers. The first one that I really like is it states really clearly that the certification standards should be seen by producers as a framework that defines an efficient, productive and sustainable system of farming rather than a series of constraints. And I think that's a great way to approach a set of standards. So as far as sheep are concerned, you can only become certified if all of your flock on the same holding are kept to PFLA standards. It's recommended 3.1.8 that when buying replacement breeding or store stock, if at all possible, you should try and source those from certified enterprises. And at this point, I'm just going to give us all a plug, because that's a really good reason to become certified. You can sell your breeding stock and your store stock, and we've now got the marketplace on the website where you can advertise those. Standard 3.4.1 says animals must be provided with pasture and forage that provide suitable nutrition for their age and stage of production. They must not be fed grain or any other form of feed concentrate. They go on to define that pasture and forage includes grass, legumes, brassicas and herbs, also forbs, browsing and shrubby growth, and arable silage or whole crop harvested in the vegetative, which is the pre-grain state. So there's a big section on what they can be fed. All of the above may be provided for grazing or as a conserved product. 3.4.8, and this is important, states that animals that are sick, ill or otherwise in poor condition must not have prohibited feeds withheld if these are necessary to maintain animal health and welfare. It goes on to say that it's recommended that producers should try and reduce their reliance on brought-in forage feeds which have a high external resource footprint, such as lucerne and grass nuts. I know that quite a few people rely on those, but they are permitted as a supplementary feed source. So just thinking about sheep and the production cycle, it says 4.1, successful production systems will be based upon careful selection of breeds to match the system and a production cycle that is matched to the growing conditions and availability of fodder. It goes on to say that lambing time should be planned to ensure that ewes and lambs can be introduced to high quality pastures and kept on them up to the point of weaning. And under 4.2, there's provision for transitional supplementary feeding of ewes at lambing. So although in theory all feed should come solely from pasture and forage, the standard states that the PFLA recognises the potential welfare challenges presented by this for some breeding animals, and in the later stages of pregnancy, the rumen capacity of a ewe is reduced as the developing lambs grow in size. This is a particular problem when ewes are carrying triploids. So to ensure the welfare of ewes and newborn lambs, there's a transitional period when you should try and wean yourselves off the use of additional cereals and lucerne nuts to deal with that particular issue. And finally, this year, in fact, last year now, for the first time, we've got a whole new animal welfare section, which basically, in a nutshell, they're there for you to read, but they reiterate the 5 freedoms, which are known to us all. And so we've now got really strong welfare standards built into our other standards. So I think that just gives you a sort of background against which this discussion tonight is going to take place.
So the importance in all of that is there's a wide range of options. Do you mean it's not necessarily focusing on the bits you can't feed, it's focusing on the wide range of options you can feed? Okay, thank you. So what we're going to do now is Ian's just going to introduce us to his system and what he does. So Ian's sheep and soon to be hopefully beef farmer. I'm hoping. Oh.
How far do you want me to go through? Just introduce myself or start?
Yeah, if you want to start
after Harriet, surely.
If you want to introduce yourself and your farm and just what you're up to at the moment, that's fine.
Okay.
And then we'll pick up the sort of the technical points afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. My name's Ian Horsley. I farm at Baston Hall in Worcestershire. It's in the north of the Malvern Hills, in the area of outstanding natural beauty. We're 140 acres. Small farm with 95 acres of pasture and then 40 acres of semi-natural ancient woodland, which kind of runs through on the hills, through the middle, running north-south. We've got nice valleys in the bottom with woodland on the top. It's 95% permanent pasture. Last year I improved one of the fields to a chicory, plantain, red clover and yarrow mix to provide a bit of fattening opportunities for lambs. That's only a small 5% of the farm so far. Next, at the end of this year, I'll be putting about 10% of the farm into a GS4 herbal lay as part of a new mid-tier stewardship scheme we've joined. We've got normally 250, but this year only 200 pedigree performance recorded Clin ewes.
Just in case we can't see your presentation, if you are moving through it.
I'm not showing it.
That's fine.
Because
okay.
Only, I can show the one page if you.
No, it was just checking. That was all. Sorry.
No, I shouldn't. I can show the nice home page. Of the Clin ewes, basically 50% are bred pure to provide replacement and to breed my own tups, so that I can breed ewes that fit this system. That's the most important thing for me. I'm performance recorded, so I take a lot of time and effort in recording the data to help me make those decisions, selecting ewes. The B flock, bottom half of the flock, basically is crossed to a New Zealand Suftex this year. I have used Hampshire rams the last 2 years. It's Suftex this year. And my homebred replacement ewe lambs in their first year are bred to a Chamois, because they provide very small lambs that don't interfere too much and cause the ewe lambs much hassle at lambing at all. All fed off grass, and everything's lambed outdoors. I no longer lamb first timers, shearlings, or anything indoors. Everything's done out in the field from the start of April normally. So a week earlier this year, just because my wife's pregnant, so we just brought everything earlier. That's me basically.
Thanks, Ian. And Duncan, do you want to just do a bit of an intro to your farm, and do you want any slides up?
No, not at the minute, Liz. I might do that when I start talking about the more technical stuff. Great, thanks for the invite. I'm Duncan Nelless, farm at Thistley off in the Coated Valley in mid-Northumberland in partnership with my brother Angus and my mum. We farm about 560 hectares, about two-thirds we own, and the rest is on 3 farm business tenancies. We lamb 2,000 registered clean ewes, like Ian, performance recorded, MV. We've been enclosed since 2003, organic since 2005. We're part of there's about the bottom 25% of the flock have been involved in the Ram Compare project for the last 5 years, is it?
Must be.
Yeah, so they've been, so we've used a whole range of terminal sires on those. We'll lamb those earlier, 20th of March, and the main flock will lamb outdoors from the 15th of April. Probably the main difference, I would say that the main difference, it's certainly providing the nutritional needs of later lambings are damn sight easier than providing it in March. I'd be very conscious of making good quality red clover silage to maintain the early lambing ewes for the Ram Compare project. Also, well, this year we're carving 210 cows. We'll carve them pretty much all outside, and we largely winter winter out the cows, but we'll come and go. We do have sheds, and we'll finish we've been enclosed with the cows since 2006, and they are Angus Hereford based, like loosely a black baldy, probably not quite. And we carve them all out. We've started going to carving them all outside now. Finish everything, and most of our finished stock go organic to Dovecote Park for Waitrose. And then we also contract finish about 1,800 pigs a year for an Aberdeenshire breeder, organic free range pigs, and we'll do around about 1,000 turkeys and 400 other birds organic for Christmas. We used to do a weekly free range organic poultry business, but that stopped a year past Christmas, the weekly one, and now we only do Christmas. There'll probably be other things I've forgotten about. We do have a B&B, but that ain't done anything for a year, and guest houses. So they've been
a bit quiet.
They've been quiet for some reason. Yeah.
It'll come back. It'll come June time. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So what we'll do is hand over to Harriet. So Harriet, if you could just do a quick introduction to yourself, and then if you're happy to go through your slides, please.
Okay. Oh, actually, maybe I should just introduce myself first. Oh, well, I'll put it. Why can I not get it on? Oh, that's better. Yes, sorry about that. Yes, just to introduce myself, I'm a vet. I specialise in sheep for, well, probably ever since I qualified, actually, which is longer ago than I'd like to think. And one of the main reasons I think I was always interested in sheep was because I feel they are a bit the neglected species, and it was sort of the area I felt there was potential to make most difference in, really. So I've been involved in practice, various other things, working for VLA and consultancy work. And I now just work for myself, consultancy work and hands-on clinical work. But as a bit of background as well to this talk, from about 2006 to 2012, I was managing a flock of ewes. We got up to about 550, moved from an indoor lambing system to outdoor lambing, organic, forage only system. So most of the photos you'll see actually are from that time, really. So yes, I have got sort of hands-on experience of doing this as well. So just my first slide, sheep should never hear the church bells twice. Very old saying, and that was really just to say, you know, the idea of rotational grazing is nothing new. People were doing it. I found a really nice quote actually of 1770 something, but it was too long to put in. But you know, it's not a new thing. But I think perhaps, you know, there obviously are a lot of differences because fields tended to be smaller then, more natural shelter, more hedges, and so obviously things have changed from that point of view. But also, you know, obviously we've got technology now to help us with rotational grazing. these days, you know, there's a lot of different terms used: rotational grazing, paddock grazing, lax rotational grazing, mob grazing, you know, all these different things. But I'm not going to be specific on any of these at all. I'm just talking about rotational grazing as a practice where the ground is grazed for a short period and then given a rest. And I think most people think probably with rotational grazing, the idea is that the grass is grazed and it doesn't have a chance to regrow and be grazed again before the animals are moved off. And actually the term I do like, said I'm not sort of going to go into anything specific, but I think would be very appropriate for, you know, the pasture-fed livestock standards, really, is holistic planned grazing. That holistic, it's looking at everything: the grass, the livestock, and the environment, and obviously planned rather than just happens. Now, sorry, I'm just having a problem in making this advance. Oops, okay, it's gone, sorry about that. So I said, basically my talk's not going to be very technical, and it's really not actually. So this is about the only figures that I've got on it. So, and it's just really to set the scene for, have I missed a slide? Yes, I have, sorry about that. So sorry, this was really setting the scene a little bit more. Looking at the challenges of sheep against cattle, and I think sheep are a little bit more challenging, yes, on rotational grazing systems. They're perhaps more challenging anyway than cattle, really. But from a rotational grazing or grazing aspect, really, they're more selective feeders. Partly that's because they've got a narrower mouth, so they're able to be more selective in what they graze. If you've got twin bearing or even triplets, obviously, but multiple bearing ewes, their nutritional demands are much greater than, say, a suckler cow. Just for them to get to the point of lambing and then to rear twin lambs is quite demanding on them. So they're much more sort of on a knife edge compared with a cow. It's relatively easy for a cow to rear a single calf. Dairy cattle obviously is different, but if you're comparing them to suckler cows, sheep are much more, we're asking for a lot more of a ewe than a cow. And the other thing I think that's makes them a bit more difficult is certainly in wooled breeds. Obviously it's easier with wool shedding sheep, but with wool breeds, it's much harder to visually assess their body condition score. So you can, you know, fairly quickly notice that a beast is losing condition, but sheep, you often don't know until you put a hand on them. So things can sort of almost creep up on you a bit more quickly, I think. So yes, if we're looking at the whole year and the idea of trying to grow all the feed on farm to feed your sheep.
And how long will this all take? You should tell me these things, that you have Zoom meetings.
Can I please remind people, if to mute yourself, other than Harriet and occasionally myself, if you can just press the mute button in the bottom left. Thank you.
Yes, so winter obviously is the real challenge. And so the top graph is of average monthly grass growth in the UK, and the bottom one on the right, daylight hours. And I think, so I only put the daylight hours in to show really whatever we try to do in having species of grass or herbage that grow better in this earlier or later, or can withstand drought conditions better. What we can't counteract, obviously, is the thing that in the UK, we have this massive variation in day length. And obviously plants grow by photosynthesis using daylight. So we're always going to have this issue that winter is a challenging period when things don't grow very much. So if I start off by looking at the winter when we've got these challenges, as Duncan mentioned earlier, obviously choosing your lambing time for when the grass is already growing again makes a lot of sense. And most people lambing outside will not be lambing, say, till April time. Lambing in March, I can imagine for Duncan, is quite a challenge. So choosing a lambing time is really important. And then you've got your options. Obviously, some people might be able to be all grass wintering, feeding forage. If you're feeding forage, the quality of that makes a massive difference in how easily it is to maintain your ewes, maintain body condition. Picture on the left there, that's feeding short chopped, high quality silage. Those ewes are actually on roots, but obviously it was snowing, so they're given silage. But there's not a problem. A ewe with twins, you can get her through until the grass is growing again on high quality silage. But if you're, say, in an environmental scheme where you can't cut your grass until it's quite mature, so you're producing poorer quality forage, that can be a big problem. And you're probably best then to be choosing less prolific breeds that you're getting more singles, because they can manage much more easily on obviously less good quality forage. But for twin bearing ewes, if you've got poor quality forage, and the problem with poor quality forage is not just that it's poor, that it's lower in nutrients, but also that animals can eat less of it because it's more fibrous to take, so it takes longer to go through the rumen. And with forage, or actually with anything really, whether you've got them on brassicas or forage or whatever, it's important to get an idea of how much animals are eating per head per day, so you can determine whether they are taking enough. And it's much, sorry, I'm finding, can I get rid, Liz, of the pictures on the side of the people just for me, or not?
You can minimize it by, if you click on somewhere on it, there's like 4 options at the top. If you choose the far left, it should disappear.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. So I just made the comment there that how things are fed is often as important as what is fed. That applies very much to brassica crops. In order to get a balance of protein and energy, if you're feeding root crops, certainly they need to be taking leaf as well as root at the same time. So moving the fence every day, rather than, as you so often see, people block grazing, put them on there, they eat all the leaf off, and then have to come back and eat all the bulb off. Maybe okay every other day, but certainly if you give them longer periods, several days, they're not getting a balance every day. Having a run back area, in my view, is really important, and that's probably something that will come through fairly strongly from what I'm going to say, really, is that animal welfare, I will put very high on decisions you make with how you manage your animals throughout the year. I've mentioned a bit about singles or twins. Competition, I've just put that in there. That's very relevant really throughout the whole year. But one thing I have I wouldn't say an issue with, but I think you need to be really careful with, bales in ring feeders. 2 reasons really. One, often there aren't enough ring feeders providing enough space for all the animals to get their fill. The rule of thumb is at least 6 inches of forage space per ewe, if the forage is available truly ad lib. But the other issue with bales and ring feeders is unless it's short chopped silage, it's hard for them to pull out, and also unless they're getting through it quite quickly, the bales tend to spoil and then become less palatable. So people think, oh, there's plenty of silage left, but actually the sheep don't want to eat it. I've got these little pictures here of mouths. So the one that's long in the tooth, you can see the gums are receding. In my view, if you came to selecting ewes post weaning, I would be culling her on a forage-based system, because those teeth she's not going to cope well on a forage-based system. And similarly, the picture at the bottom, yearling. Throughout all the year, really, I would encourage managing a yearling separately. Try to divide your groups up so that you're minimising competition. So fat ewes go together, thin ewes go together, yearlings are together. Once you've scanned, they go according to number of lambs.
Harry, if you hover on the screen, if you go to on the bottom left of your presentation is
thank you.
I'm like an IT support person.
Thank you. I need IT support, definitely. So moving on, like I said, I'm not not going to go into technical, because I haven't got time to really, how much animals need and whatever to get through, but just more the general issues that you're needing to consider. So late pregnancy, obviously you're thinking of satisfying the protein and energy needs of the ewes, but getting closer to lambing, ease of lambing becomes a big consideration again. Breed choice can make a big difference, but even well, with almost all breeds really, you do need to be considering singles need less feed obviously, and doubles need more, so splitting them up makes a lot of sense. What we really want to avoid is the picture at the top right, going out in the morning, finding hung lambs. So I said breed makes a big difference, pre-lambing nutrition. Body condition score does make a difference. Thin ewes actually often have big lambs. So thinking if I keep my ewes a lot leaner, I'm going to have easier lambing will not necessarily follow. And you're much better to have your ewes a bit, not too fit, so probably for outdoor lambing, 2.5 to 3, depending on the breed. Romneys probably get to a 3, but thinking that keeping them leaner will make them lamb easier definitely won't follow. Picture on the right, I've just mentioned there, see that ewes lambing down in a little bit of woodland. Shelter at lambing time, so rotational grazing is not a good idea actually when you're lambing. Ewes then need to be set stocked so the ewe can find the place where she wants to lamb and not be disturbed. And then there's a bit of a perhaps debate how long they should stay set stocked for after lambing. And it'll be interesting to hear actually what Duncan and Ian do with that, but there's been some work recently suggesting you can get as good performance set stocking as opposed to rotational grazing, but when I was doing, we did used to leave them for a few weeks and then start rotational grazing. So now moving on to the lactation period when the ewe is rearing the lambs. And these, I think, will be your priority groups. So ewes rearing twins, ewe lambs with lambs at foot. These groups are the priority for getting the best grazing. And in my view, you don't want to be pushing them at any time. You don't want them to be making them graze down too low or putting them under any pressure at any time. As I mentioned earlier, a ewe rearing twins is under a lot of nutritional stress. And if you start putting her under pressure, that's when she's more likely to get mastitis, maybe hypomagnesemia, and obviously the lambs, she won't milk as well and the lambs won't do as well. So if you've got other stock on the farm that you can have a leader follower system, that works well. So the ewes with twins or the ewe lambs go on, just graze off a bit, and then they move on, and then the other stock come in behind. But I just think what you don't want to be doing is making them graze down maybe to a residual of 1500 or something. And I mentioned there feast to famine. If you're going for daily moves, that's probably not a problem, but obviously a lot of people with sheep wouldn't be doing that. So you just want to be careful. You're not putting them onto decent covers, 2,500 kilograms dry matter, say. So they go onto that, and you're expecting them then to stay there 3 days and then to move them on. The last day, they're not going to have anything like as much. So they've got 1 day of eating loads, another day of eating a reasonable amount, third day of not eating a great deal, then you move them on. That's not a good way to manage them. They never really, ewes with twins and ewe lambs with lambs at foot, don't ever want to be short of grass. I think I mentioned that. Once the lambs get a little bit older, weaning date should be flexible based on your lamb growth rates and ewe body condition score. It's a pretty fit ewe there, and that's really what you want to aim for. You don't want your ewes to be losing a lot of condition during lactation. It's a costly thing, costs more in the amount she's got to eat to regain condition. But I think throughout, when you're rotational grazing, flexibility is really the key, that you can have a plan. like you can put ewes onto a field and expect them to last there 3 days, but actually you go in after a day and a half and they're short of grass, they get moved. Flexibility is really the key. Moving on then to after weaning, who's priority now? That's what you need to decide then, what's going to get priority for the best grazing, to be the leader in your system. Is it your weaned lambs or is it your ewes? And that depends very much then on the body condition score of your ewes and how long you've got between the interval between weaning and tupping. So if your ewes are too thin, they are a priority to get the condition back on the ewes rather than the lambs. And you've always got the option, obviously, to sell the lambs, sell them as stores rather than to finish them. But once again, weaned lambs shouldn't be made to graze too low residuals. Parasites are now, well, parasites obviously are a problem for lambs from when they start grazing too low. It isn't just that they're necessarily taking in more worm larvae, it's also that if you're putting them under any stress because they're short of feed, that makes them less able to fight the parasites, and similarly makes them less able to fight pasturalosis. And you'll find a lot of outbreaks in pasturalosis in weaned lambs actually is because the lambs have got worms because they've been made to graze too hard, and then the end result is that they die from pasturalosis. But it goes back a lot further than that. It isn't, the pasturalosis is the secondary effect from being kept too hard. Just a mention in all great, well, I think in all, whenever we're keeping animals, we should always be aware of the 5 freedoms, as Felicity mentioned earlier, one of which is to express normal behaviour. And that, I think, in some of these maybe techno-grazing systems where animals are put on a very small area and moved every day, that can perhaps be an issue, that animals can't express normal behaviour. They're made to graze closer together than they'd really like. And I sometimes have a little bit of an issue that welfare is being a little bit compromised. And the other thing there would be shelter or shade. And shade is probably generally more important than shelter, other than when ewes are lambing and you've got young lambs at foot. But it may be true that animals deprived of shade in our UK climate, it doesn't significantly affect their performance or production, but on a hot sunny day when it's in high 20s, animals will seek shade, and I feel denying them that opportunity, well, maybe put it another way around, that we should allow them to express that normal behaviour and to get out of the sun. This is my final slide. Just really to sum up, within all grazing systems, I think we should be looking at a balance between maximising utilisation of forage with animal performance, and more and more so with caring for the environment, encouraging species diversity, insect communities and other wildlife. So focusing on one thing, like if you're particularly focusing, say, on just maximising grass utilisation, focusing on one thing almost certainly leads to compromises in other areas. And certainly I think with animal health, if you focus too much on utilising every last bit of grass, animal health will suffer. So it's just a balance of getting it right. And everyone will perhaps be looking for a slightly different balance, because the other balance will be in terms of rotational grazing, how often you're moving the animals, on your other commitments and your lifestyle and how much time you want to be spending. So I think balance is a really important thing. Flexibility, you can set up a plan, a grazing plan based on predicted grass growth and whatever, and then things don't, it doesn't rain or whatever, and so you just got to be flexible, not stick rigidly to your plan. And I do see this with some of the people I work for, that they measure their grass with a plate meter, set up their areas, and they just perhaps don't observe quite enough to notice that actually their plan isn't quite, things aren't working out quite as well as they should be. Selecting the right animals for your system. When you first start, you'll find some animals won't cope very well in your grazing system, but some will, and keep selecting your replacements from the ones that maintain their condition and perform well. You will, over time, select a flock that's much more able to thrive under your system. And finally, I really like that little quote there, the eye of the master fattens the cattle. Good stockmanship is vital. You cannot just rely on your measurements, your grass measurements, whatever. It is noticing and seeing what's happening and acting on it, obviously. And that little quote actually came from a guy called Alf Kinsel, I think his name is. He trades under White Clover Sheep Farm, and that's a really interesting site. Actually, he's got a website. It's White Clover Sheep Farm, if anyone's interested. And he rotationally grazes his sheep. Never measures anything. Actually, he does everything by eye and observation. Tends to graze higher sward heights. Moves them every day, but so that's a useful one to look at. And I think that's all I'd like to say. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Harriet. There is a question. I always hate this question when someone asks me, so I'm going to ask it to someone else. So what sort of overall stocking rates are you aiming for?
I definitely not going to give a figure on that, because it depends on so many things. It depends what breed you're running, how prolific your ewes are, what your pastures are like, how much grass you're able to grow. It depends on too many things, doesn't it, Liz? I think you can't, I can't come up with a figure for that.
And there's some nice work from Ireland, you mean in more system stuff, which is comparing sort of 10 ewes a hectare, 12 and 14. And it is a bit like you said, which is about the balance, isn't it? That you can push it higher, but your input cost goes up. So it's something I tend to do a lot more now on demand and how the demand changes over the year, and sort of and in relation to the grass growth curve that you showed at the beginning. So yeah, I'm sorry we didn't answer that question, but I'll bring the farmers in actually as well in a second. And there's just one more. And in terms of, have you got any thoughts in terms of cattle and sheep grazing together, or either together in the same field or one after the other?
I think having cattle generally makes it a lot easier with sheep, partly because, as I mentioned, sheep are much more selective grazers. And they can be really annoying. I've seen it, sheep put it onto a herbal lay, quite a decent, well, high. This guy's doing more regenerative grazing. Put it in at a high sward height, and the sheep just pick the bits they like and graze them to the floor. They didn't have enough sheep, he probably didn't move them off quick enough, but sheep are very selective, so it's much easier then to have cattle to come in after and take it down and keep it tidier. So I think managing sheep on a rotational grazing system is actually a lot easier if you have cattle as well than doing it if you've just got sheep.
Thank you.
Well, just that's a bit the co-grazing. You know, sometimes we do see disease. There's a particular malignant catarrhal fever you see in cattle when they carry the virus, then cattle go down with it. So there are some issues with co-grazing. I wouldn't say it's wrong, but another topic, another question there isn't a yes or a no answer to, really.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to Ian actually. Ian, we were having a chat the other day in terms of thinking if we go back to sort of you on your pasture fed sort of system, you think topping is quite a challenge for you?
It is, in terms of having enough grass in front of sheep at that time of year, given that you're trying to lamb in April, which leaves you all of November to top, and at that point grass has stopped growing quite substantially. So you're having to set up fields and keep enough pasture back, especially in the system that I'm running and all that Duncan's running, lots of single sire mating groups, which gets complicated as at the best of times, but also in terms of needing more fields available. For example, I need 5 fields available. The farm only has 13 proper fields, one particularly large one, which always gets broken up with semi-permanent electric fencing. So I kind of run 16 fields or something like that. But each one of those fields for me will invariably get broken down to at least 10 pieces anyway. So, excuse me.
And that's all with electric. So you'd be using
all
electric.
Yeah, generally all of my fields, I would say, get split longitudinally, so the longest way down the field, and then I use using a wrapper fencing equipment, or a wrapper fencing trailer, put a single line down the middle of the biggest fields, and that will generally stay there all year. And then I'll do daily breaks, or 2 daily breaks, or 3 daily breaks, using small hand reels. I'll sort of go through that a little bit in my.
Yeah, well, do you want to flick that up now, and we'll talk through that?
Yeah, sure.
So in terms of, and so you're getting them to the end of topping, well, just as you get that on. So and then what do they go somewhere else over some of the winter, or what do you do?
Yeah, so I mean, this sort of this slide shows the problem I have. The yellow line, if everyone can see that, is 2019. This is my total average farm cover. Yellow is 2019, blue is 2018, and the black blue is 2020. Sorry, so that was a particularly rubbish year. The yellow year was a good year. We had great grass growth in the summer, and I felt I was going to carry huge amounts of grass through from this period here in September. I was going to have loads come topping time, but it had all gone because it just stopped growing. The weather system changed so much that what we had got eaten and didn't get replaced. Whereas in these 2 years, although we didn't get the summer growth, what we had kept going. So each time entering topping for the last 3 years, I've ended up with exactly the same farm cover, and have had to work desperately to keep enough grass in front of sheep during topping time. And with a few of the groups, I've quite often end up having to put a couple of ring feeders out just to top them up and make sure there's a bit of haylage for them, just to keep things going, because by that time I'm struggling. And I think that is a downside for me in outdoor lambing, is that your topping's much later. If I was lambing in a shed in March, then I'll be topping in October. Grass is still growing a bit, so that makes topping that part of the year just that little bit easier.
Then we can see that your pasture cover declines quite strongly, doesn't it, after that point?
It does, yeah.
That's about 2,000, which is what, 8 to 10 centimetres ish, something like that.
Yeah.
And then it drops down to sort of 1,600, which is sort of 5 to 6 centimetres sward height.
Yeah, exactly. And then just stays there, and I'm now sort of sitting there. That's the average farm cover. Obviously, I'll close up fields that I'm looking to lamb in. Will get closed up a little bit earlier, so they'll be carrying a little bit more cover during the winter, with the hope that they will get to a point in mid to late March where there's closer to 2,000 covers for my lambing fields is what I like to see. And if necessary, I'll try and whip the sheep through and tidy things up, or get a quick round in the fields that I'm not going to lamb in before lambing. But for example, at the moment, my sheep are away on the next door neighbour's cattle farm. That's the only way I can really get around it at the moment, is I use his 140 acres, and they just graze around, grazing the remains of his end of year grass covers. Not vast amounts, but it is fresh, it is green, and apart from fencing it, I don't have to go and take hay out to them. So at the moment, I've got a shed full of hay, which I'm not really using, which is good. I'm not going to complain. They will come back this week for the Heptavac, and then that's them on farm until lambing.
But the important thing from that is that you're not, come the 1st of March, expecting grass to be there. You are actively planning that grass you're going to lamb on.
Exactly. I'm actively keeping fields back to lamb on fields. So I'll have chosen which fields I'm going to lamb on. The last couple of years I've lambed the same fields. This year I'm changing it around so they got not just from a parasite point of view. So there's different. It's so that those fields that I've lambed on the last 2 years have an opportunity to grow through that first April cycle of grass growth, and get to express themselves a little bit during that point, and I'll graze them straight after lambing, rather than yeah, it's just to change the system so everything doesn't get grazed at the same time every year. That's my thought this year. So this was a topping. This was one of my topping groups. There's actually Duncan, your Ram's in there somewhere. He's I didn't put a rattle on him, so he is working. You just don't know it. I decided he could be trusted without a rattle. So I do daily or 2 or 3 daily shifts at that time of year. Very flexible, depends on how much they're eating. Because they're not a massive group, there's only 50 in that group. I don't need to move them every day. But I do use quite a bit of forage planning. I do have my trusty plate meter just to give me an idea. I don't swear by it, and I don't. But it is pretty good for telling me roughly how long I'll have in a field if I want. But because I've started grazing much longer grass these days, it's not quite so useful. But it's good to. It's very good for seeing when shortfalls are coming. For example, in August, back in the drought of 2018, I had to feed in August. I had grass in front of them, but I knew that if I didn't feed, I would have no grass in front of them come September, October. So I fed them in August when their demand wasn't quite as high, so that I had grass for topping on. So it was really useful for planning further down the line. Again, as Harriet said, flexibility is useful. I manage stock numbers. I might sell stores if forage gets tight. I'm quite happy to accept I won't take everything through to finishing. I don't mind that. I haven't got the fields to finish them, and I'm quite happy to sell stuff at stores if necessary. I try and keep my tupping as tight as compact, using tight as possible, using teasers. That's so that I don't have to worry quite so much about having great grass for the whole of the month, and also it just makes life a lot easier come lambing time. So this year it's worked really successfully, and I think pretty much everything bar a few have tupped in the first 2 weeks of the cycle. Most importantly for me really is culling ewes that don't put on condition post weaning, and I'm just trying to breed ewes that work on this system. Because I don't feed anything other than grass or conserve forage, it's important for me that the ewes can work with that system, and it is just permanent pasture. There's very little new lays. It's not rocket fuel, and I'm making them eat longer grass at different times of the year. So I want ewes that can convert that into decent, into body condition, and I do check body condition score for that.
Sorry,
that's quite all right. During winter, as I said, at the moment, most of all my sheep are next door. This is a field that there's a photo there that's showing them on an arable cover crop. That was the first time I've used that as on a neighbouring farm. I don't think nutritionally that was brilliant stuff. They did okay. But it's starting up I wanted to demonstrate that I could do it for his purposes, because then maybe we can plan some winter cover crops that will be better suited for me, and it's just sort of starting a relationship locally. That's one of the reasons I possibly can't go organic, because then you can't go and graze other people's fields. I've tried drilling kale a couple of times. I've tried direct drilling cover crops into grass this winter. Basically, all those sort of experiments have failed. They've been fairly unimpressive. Last year it was so wet, I put stock on in a shed and fed them haylage. That was really good for getting condition back on them. But the most important thing for me is grazing next door, which could be a problem because I think that farm's up for sale. So we're going to have to come up with a new solution for winter, which is going to be that pinch point for me. When they come back onto the farm for the final 3 weeks, I try and get them onto get around the farm, keep them on good grass, keep them grazing. I have in the past. I might sometimes have to feed haylage. It depends what grass covers are like at that time, but I will desperately try and have grass in front of them for that last 3 weeks, because I don't want to sacrifice the ewes condition and that final lamb growth going into the lambing paddocks. I don't put them in the lambing paddocks until literally a couple of days before, to keep it as good as possible. They'll be very close to them, so they won't be transiting miles across the farm to go. But I've never found a problem with them not settling down. I've had ewes comfortably finding safe spots and lambing within 2 or 3 days of being in those fields. I don't feel they need to be in the field for 2 weeks, getting used to that field before they lamb. As I said, I try and target 2,000 cover for twins. Singles, I'm really not concerned about too much. There's a bigger issue is keeping them on tight grass and for them not to get fat. Frankly, last year I kept them pretty tight, and I gave them the worst field and kept them in it for the whole of lambing, and not a problem. They're still kicking out big lambs. Triplets, I did buy a bag of lucerne pellets last year, just a 1-ton tote bag, which I fed a little bit to ewe lambs in the last couple of weeks, and to triplets. They weren't hugely impressed with them. I don't think they like them that much. And I'm not, this year I actually just sold my triplet bearing ewes instead. So I sold them after scanning because I don't really want to have them in the system. It'll pull my scanning rate down, but I don't really mind. It's more, I do everything on my own, really. My wife runs the other half of the business. So I don't really want to be dealing with triplets and adoptions, wet adoptions in the field. I do. But I'd rather not. So I'm selling them out of the system. That's just me tagging that photo there. I use a dog crate to so I can tag twins, so the ewe doesn't walk off with the second lamb while I'm tagging the first one.
Thanks, Ian. Sorry, Ian. There's just a couple of questions coming through.
Okay. Yeah, I can't see those.
So just. When you fed in August, did you slow your rotation and kept them in that paddock so it was like a sacrifice area?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
And a second question, which is, and you've mentioned longer grass a couple of times.
Yeah.
What length are we talking about?
That sort of, obviously that's a bit later in the year, so I haven't quite got to that point yet. But 3,500 for. Oh, I've been kicked out. What's happened there? Oh no. Am I still sharing that screen?
Yeah, it's gone off presentation view.
Yeah.
There we go.
Anything up to, I don't know, a foot. Some of it will be heading for sure. So that it will definitely have lost quality. I have been told off by people in the past that I'm grazing it too long, but I kind of figure they actually will graze into the base of it as well. They're not trying to graze the whole thing of standing hay. I might do that later on in the year with ewes when they're drying up and things like that as a management tool. But I'm quite happy to have sheep go through a field that's longer grass. I just don't make them eat it all. And ideally what I need are either hogs coming up behind them or cattle in future. At the moment, sometimes they're going through it and I'll move them on. They don't eat it all down, but then obviously I've got management issues as to what the regrowth is like. So I'm possibly suffering with regrowth issues the next time round. But I found eating longer grass, their growth rates will dip a little bit. They won't be, the lambs will grow, but they'll grow consistently at a slightly lower level. Whereas eating short rocket fuel grass, they might grow really quickly, but then they'll probably come up with a parasite challenge, and then that knocks them back, and then they go, so stop and go. As I found that the couple of years, I didn't manage last year, the grass wasn't there. The year before it worked. So you have to be flexible. And on the years that the grass was lush and long, I let them go for it and move them on, and I was really pleased with how it worked. Last year it was too dry. We just didn't get that opportunity. Everything just headed instantly. Okay. So it was just stemmy and pretty poor quality. It was a struggle last year.
Thank you. We'll move to Duncan just to go through his winter bit up to lambing. If I'm just going to share my screen for a second, if you can just.
Absolutely, I'm stopping. There we go.
Thank you. So Duncan, in terms of I've got these videos, but I'm not sure they're in the right order. But just in terms of, obviously, as you defined it, a nice picture of a sheep there.
Well, yeah, our winter will start. We're tupping on quite high covers, and this year we've been tupping large groups of ewes, single sire mating them, but just leaving a rattled tup in for 3 to 4 days. So in a group of 330 with a single sire, and then running them through a set of prattleys off with a rattled ewes and leaving them with that sire and putting another one in to try and drop the number of single sire mating groups we have. You see this broken up here. They're going on to quite high covers here, and we put them on so they could be as selective as they want during tupping. We're on about I would say 15 days before tupping, and then we're moving them on daily shifts in a big number. We did have some single sire groups that were just in groups of 80 with a single sire, but we've experimented with this for this year and last year. We think we can still improve it a bit. One things we're looking for from it were better use of the higher genetic merit sires and better ability to retain covers for an all grass wintering. The covers it definitely helped with. We definitely made less of an impact on our going into the harder part of the winter with having better covers and having stripped less to the farm. They did have a slightly higher return rate in them, but we were doing it with 400 ewes last year, and we dropped it to 330 this year, and we're scanning tomorrow, so I don't know, we'll see.
And with your all grass wintering, so you aim in, they're basically I know the rams move with the sheep, but the tupping period ends, and then are they quite quickly onto paddocks, or? They are. I mean,
I do say all grass wintering, but sort of from about sort of 50 days, once I've gone through a second cycle, and probably in the previous month to now, we're probably looking for, certainly for the main crop, we're looking to get onto the better stuff now. We might take the opportunity to feed them hay when they have a lower nutritional requirement. We like doing lots of recording, do a lot of body condition scoring. This was pre-lamb, pre-tupping, where we're condition scoring them and weighing them and putting them into the mating groups.
And so, similar to Ian, you'd select out sheep that weren't coping?
Yes, we would. You would certainly be looking at that. Post weaning would probably make an effort to take out thin ewes and give them the chance with better grub to put condition on. If they didn't, then that's probably the end for them. So we think it's good value to get condition onto these ewes. Pre-tupping it and maintaining it really as far into post-tupping as we can. I mean, people talk about the golden 20. We'll kind of try and stretch that a bit further, and hope to keep the condition on them and hold a scan in them. I think that's the opportunity for it, really. I mean, this one's a bit of a snow. Like you've always got a thin end at the front of the photo there.
She's not holding a foot as well, because that. No, she's not. I'm winding you up.
400 there on snow. This was last week when we had snow cover on. So these had just started on deferred grazing, and we had bales set up for them. This was set up actually to calve cows on, but we think we're gonna, and we still are gonna do it, calve cows on it. But there's enough area now for us to actually give this group of ewes some. And this is the same one 2 days ago, the same group 2 days ago. So as you can see that on the right, that's the deferred grass, and they're getting some silage as well. So nice day in the Coquet Valley.
And so in terms of, that your bales in the first one was sort of your plan B, snow cover. You had that as an option to, oh, sorry, I didn't put this. And then, but the dream would for them to be over that winter on fields that look a bit like this, and then strip grazed or block grazed onto them.
That would be the ideal. But I think sometimes with winter grass that in this condition, even though there's a bit of senescent in it, like you can see there's dead grass because it's obviously spent. That's it under snow. it's still probably good enough for them in mid-pregnancy. So if we actually have hay that's good quality hay, we might as well take the opportunity to feed that sort of that lower nutritionally dense stuff when the ewes, especially if they're in good condition, need it less. And we can always find a use for good stuff as they're starting to get into the last sort of 6 to 8 weeks before pregnancy. So that's a good thing to have on hand. We're quite often, we can sometimes, we do have sheds, but we couldn't house all the ewes. But quite often we might bring a bunch of ewes in, take the opportunity to take them off the grazing platform and feed them something a little less hot, just to take the opportunity where they can handle it.
And that's, do you mean basically every day they're not eating grass? It's just hopefully it's stockpiling a bit, isn't it? And then okay.
Just on the stocking rate, I mean, like somebody asked the question on stocking rate, we're around about, through the year, we're on about 1.1 per hectare, 1.1. We were at 1.2, but there's like on the horizon, and that one on the left there, that was a farm we bought 3 years ago. That's a little bit more marginal, and across the whole farm, that we dropped the stocking density because that doesn't have the carrying capacity of Thistleyard, which is kind of sort of a good marginal farm.
So that's livestock units. So a ewe would be sort of 1.18, 1.2
across the year.
Yeah.
As we're going through, I mean, I'll stick on the actual. We actually run two totally different systems. I mean, they're both totally forage based, but these ones are the main crop that we lamb outside and are the main where we breed our replacements and where in our seal breeding stock from. They are a lot easier to look after because when we come into lambing, they'll be looking at we're going to lamb them when we're expecting grass growth. I mean, like we try and give them as much room as we can. I mean, I know that when we first started outdoor lambing and going concentrate free 2007, I think was the first year, and the perception was for twins at 5 to the acre, about 12 to the hectare, whereas I would suggest that's probably to make your life easy to stop mismothering and to certainly not have to bother with them for like moving them for 2 or 3 weeks. I'd say that's probably too much, too high a stocking density, certainly on our system. But I would quite happily go in at 14 to 1600 ewes going on to 14 to 1600 lambing paddocks with the idea that in mid-April grass is going to start growing at them. If we'll put them on higher covers than that, then the grass has kind of left us a little for sheep before we get a chance to start rotating, before we get a chance to put them up, because lambs to a fortnight old, probably we don't want to be, well, even older really, we don't want to have to stick together too tightly and be moving too much.
So basically 14, 1600, about 4 or 5 centimetres sward height.
It's quite tight. It looks quite tight.
Yeah. But you're that little bit later, aren't you? So you're mid-April. So then most years it's growing to them.
It's grown and it's really good, And we never have any worries with twin lamb or use a putting condition on at that stage. If it's good, it's good and very in high energy. Their intakes are limited anyway, so they just need something good to go into them. And we do run more and more leader. We have plenty of cattle, so with the rotations we try to be not too aggressive with them, having to eat too far down the profile. Especially with young lambs, we don't want to put any pressure or nutritional or stress of any other sort on sheep and using lambs at that stage. So they get to select exactly what they want out of the sward, and then we'll follow up with cattle. If we do need to make conserved feed, so sometimes we'll drop paddocks out to make silage or hay out of. But I think the key to young lambs, we find that when we were doing on too short a rotation, that we're putting ewes and lambs on, and especially when they're young lambs, the ewes were going on, moving through, and they were going, eating all the good stuff. And while the lambs are running around trying to find their mums have filled themselves up. So we don't really do anything shorter than 3-day rotation with ewes and lambs.
Just one question that's come through, which is what age would you start that rotation?
The lambs are probably more than a fortnight, as I mean, probably 3 weeks really.
Okay.
We do sometimes drift lamb a little. So if we can leave the first lambs behind on the paddocks they're on, we can maybe get them together. But we would do it very gently. And like if I say rotation, possibly more what we'd do is have the field set up and then just leave the gate open so they can start wandering through and let them get used to just following their mums through on the better stuff for a wee while. So it's not very very aggressive in the early days of the lambs like.
Well, just before we sort of move in towards sort of post-lambing, heading towards winning, but just I want Harriet just to pick up. I just want to pick one question up with Harriet, which is, you talked about sort of the protein or the challenges of particularly on brassica crops, which is getting protein in if the leaf is gone. So for some fodder beet crops or some turnipy crops, you don't get a lot of leaf there as you're heading towards lambing time. So what are options that you would encourage farmers to consider from a protein perspective?
Okay,
on more sort of forage crops with less leaf, I suppose.
Yeah, if you, so are you talking probably about still grazing a fodder beet crop, are you, Liz?
Yeah.
Well, then practically I can only see really that you would just to feed some high quality silage with it really. But some people are putting, well, isn't it in the PFLA standards that you're not supposed to plant a brassica crop as a monoculture? It should have other things in it anyway. And some people are putting other things like, I think one of my guys have put oats and vetch in strips in with his stubble turnips, which is a really good idea. So then you've got the more protein and from that, as well as the stubble turnips. Because I do find, a lot of people feeding, especially things like fodder beet with not enough leaf. If you blood sample some ewes pre-lambing, their albumin levels are low. They've not been getting enough protein. And they can hold their condition, they look okay, but they're not getting enough protein, and that will then impact on colostrum quality. And
I suppose some people, they push it knowing they're going to go on grass for 2 or 3 weeks, aren't they, pre-lambing?
That's it. And they think they'll be okay. And actually, that's something I'm quite interested. I've been looking into it a little bit more this year, actually, to see if they become hyperproteinemic, so their blood albumin drops a bit low, how quickly will that go back up if they go back onto grass? And I'm not sure. I don't think the data's there actually, but it'll be interesting to see.
Okay.
There's been that work done recently looking at lamb survival, and blood albumin pre-lambing in ewes is a factor affecting lamb survival, which isn't, we've always known that. If you don't feed enough protein, they don't produce the antibodies in colostrum, so therefore
and also enough udder development or milk generally.
Well,
okay.
So, it's nothing new, but it would be interesting to get a bit more data, I think.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring Ian back in, which is, so Ian, so from lambing onwards, and I know you're about to show us your grass forage results.
Yeah.
But how do you then manage? So Duncan sort of starts that rotation sort of 3 weeks-ish. When do you start moving ewes and lambs?
I will move them off their lambing field about the same sort of time, because I'd get that first cycle. I'll have a first cycle group and a second cycle group. That's my lambing. That'll be like, I'll have twins in one field, singles in another field, triplets somewhere else, ewe lambs somewhere else. So I'll have sort of 4 groups to manage at lambing. When the twins get to a point where everything has lambed, then I'll move them into the next field. I'll try and set it up so that they only have that one gate to go through, if possible. So they can sort of get them through very easily, and then I'll put them into a large. I'll introduce them to electric fencing at that point, so they'll go into a large area. It won't be a sort of a daily shift type paddock at that point. It might be a quarter of the field, but I want them to sort of experience some kind of movement, and fairly quickly. I'll get them onto daily or 2 daily moves. Really, I prefer daily. Really. Then the feed is always in front of them.
Yeah.
Rather than having that, as you said, the peak and trough where they've got great food, and then the end of the second day they really haven't got that much good food, and then they suddenly get great food again. I think it's just sort of better that they go straight through. and I haven't found mismothering problems. I haven't found I don't find lambs particularly hollow and empty in the corner. And yeah, there will be some issues along the way. There always are. But I don't think ideally, I'd probably like to have them in smaller groups. I mean, the discussion you mentioned earlier that perhaps sheep actually do better being set stocked for a bit longer at that point. And actually, now that I'm understocked this year, I probably should stay set stocked, because they might actually keep on top of grass better, and it'll never get away from me quite so much. The disadvantage of rotationary grazing when you're understocked is you're forever closing fields up. It's always away from you, and you spend all of May and June and July, or May and June, complaining that you're understocked. So maybe I should give myself an easy life and not bother rotationally grazing this year.
And just so would you do any monitoring? You'll do monitoring for 8 weeks because performance recorded.
Yes, yeah.
And then just the questions coming in for Ian particularly, which is what software are you using to measure at that? Do you mean obviously you're measuring quite a lot of the year, but how are you using that information at that time of year to close up paddocks or prioritize animals?
I'm really using it to give. So I've got a plate meter. It goes into P+, which is a software that came with it. It's a bit clunky. I then move that data into AgriNet, which is still a bit clunky. But I don't want to pay for any like the more complex systems because I don't really utilize it that much. I'm not trying to run a maximum production, maximum efficiency system here. I've got to admit that. 5 years ago, that's what I would have been targeting to do, but I'm not interested in that now. I'd much rather have diverse species, longer grass. I like seeing more insects in the species in the grazing. I see a much more diverse sward. There's a lot more herbs coming through. I find it more interesting. So I'm not trying to maximize my production anymore. I'm trying to maximize taste. Maybe that might be a better way to do it. And make a more enjoyable system to work in for me. So I do use it to keep an eye on where the fields are. I use it as a way to plan which ones I'll take out, and I use it to work out when I'm falling short of feed, where there's a potential to fall short of feed in the future if things aren't growing back quite as quick. I just find it easier to have a number to look at rather than just trusting my eye the whole time.
And certainly, I suppose the element which we have with when we're we're 100% grass and forage focus, which is we don't have a plan B or do you mean you can't just ring up a feed merchant and it rocks up on farm? So that element of planning appears to be quite important. It's a common theme you hear from these high forage systems.
But more of an issue in winter. It's not an issue in summer. I don't find. Yeah, it might be an issue looking forward to where tupping is because you've had a drought in August, but it's not an issue. I'm not running short of feed and worrying about having to put creep into lambs or anything. I wanted to show one picture if I can. I've lost it now.
Yeah, just as Ian's finding that, just to Fidelity's written a note on chat about that. The brassicas and root crops must be grown with another species, as Harriet mentioned. So it is about they shouldn't they're not allowed within a monoculture.
That was these are just two fresh grass samples I did pre-lambing and during lambing as an idea, just with the protein and the ME levels, showing how good this is. Permanent pasture. This is not. Yeah, all permanent pasture is as good as any new lay at this time of the year. It's only April, May onwards when it starts to head. That's when the quality of permanent pasture might dip away from a sort of a newer lay. But it certainly provides everything the ewe needs in my mind. Harriet might. I hope she agrees.
No, I do.
Good.
And I think sometimes what you see, particularly in more, I suppose, where there's a bit more nitrogen applied, which I know you're not, which is sometimes you see very high protein levels, which can cause some problems. But I think that's quite a nice balanced.
And actually, one thing it might not provide is enough magnesium. or the ewes might not absorb enough magnesium, but in terms of protein and energy, it can definitely provide enough.
This isn't really anything to do with this. I just thought it might be useful because it's quite fun to see. One of the best things that I've added to my flock in the last few years is the Udley EZ for milking ewes. It's absolutely phenomenal. I can do it in a field against the fence. I can pop a ewe and her lamb in the trailer, milk them and feed them in the field if necessary, if a lamb needs topping up or whatever reason. And that's I use Border software for my recording. And
just quickly, Ian, where was your analysis done? Is Scientech, is it, or
this one?
Yeah,
that was Tro Nutrition.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that was that was when I was part of the HDB. It's not Grass Check. That's what it became. Forage for Knowledge. But then they kicked all the sheep farms out. They only wanted cattle, dairy. So the sheep farms all got binned. Sorry about that.
But any agricultural merchants would be able to access. So NRM, Cyant, well, they're the same thing. But yeah, there's a range of companies out there offering it. I'm just conscious of time, as ever. We've got lots to talk about. But I just wanted to switch to Duncan briefly. Again, just sort of talking from 8 weeks to weaning. So what do you find particularly, well, Ian's always got loads of grass, so he's all good. I'm being flippant. But Duncan, do you have particular queries around that time of year, or generally grass is keeping up with your stocking rate?
Yeah, I would say it usually is. I mean, it's usually sort of staying ahead of grass at that time of year. I mean, there was a bit of, I don't know, like we've been using Farmax since 2012, and there was it went on Twitter, one of our grass growth charts, and the variation in summer grass growth is quite huge. But like I'd say with Ian, his grass growth showed the same as ours. You know, where it's sort of critical, it's amazingly consistent at the shoulders of the season. I mean, you just don't grow grass in January, so you know that. So you've got to have either something conserved behind it. Grass growth can go all over in the summer, but nothing's going to die from that. You know, what we've got now can have pretty major consequences to the whole system, where the ewes are and what's in front of them at the minute. The same as having it in the effect it has on the following year in November, December through till now. So and that in our grass growth since 2013, it doesn't vary a heck of a lot during the winter. It varies a heck of a lot during the summer, but you can manage that. There's options to manage that then. So yeah, planning. I'm a big fan of planning and trying to use sort of technology to do it. We use Farmax. It doesn't take away from what's in front of your eyes, but it does give us an idea where we'll be in June from today, if we can actually get our live weights on and what we're feeding, supplementation, where we'll go from about 8 weeks. We'll do for the terminal sires. We'll get try and get them onto as pure red clover layers. We'll work with an organic arable place, and we'll try and we'll usually manage to get about 70% of the terminal crosses off their mums. Try and get as much of that away as that. There's a bit more variation in the types of ground that we're main crop are on. Singles are generally on harder going, but we generally are hoping to be weaning, having grown about 320 grams a day to weaning, by trying to keep them right. The terminal sires this year they averaged 370 to slaughter to weaning, to slaughter. So there was a big the variation. You know, we'll get some really good growths on those arable break legumes. You know, and I always think that we shouldn't run away from good performances being pasture fed. It's like high performance is perfectly. We can manage that perfectly on a pasture fed system, and we shouldn't run away from cost of production either, because you know, I think you can. I think that's the, you know, we can hold a hand up with a lot of systems.
Because what's interesting about those lambs is that, do you mean they're born in April? No, sorry, they're born in March, aren't they? Those the ram compare ones. So, so it's, well, and that, do you mean, we've had many debates about this, but do you mean in terms of almost getting to biological maximum for what sheep can do?
Yeah.
And that's a nice combination of really good focus on maternal genetics, that terminal sire coming in, and really good feeds. That, do you mean it's a perfect combination?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, really, you know, there's not a magic trick to it. It's just sort of best practice we try and follow to get that. But I mean, we, you know, the ram compare lambs averaged 87 days to slaughter this year, you know, and so like most of them, we got off the mums.
And all pasture fed, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Harriet, just one that you mentioned in yours about age of weaning. Do you have any guidance? When would you? I know you said it has to be. It varies on the year, but do you have a certain number you'd aim for?
Would I say a certain number? More, I'd say, Liz, from sort of 8 to 10 weeks. If you're handling the ewes, so I base it on how much grass you've got available, body conditions for the ewes. What the lambs are doing, daily life weight gain. So if the lambs are dropping off by 10 weeks, they're better weaned. So there's no competition between the ewes and the lambs for the best pasture. The lambs get it. If the ewes are too thin, I'd wean earlier. So really, I'd say from 10 weeks, I'd make the decision. If you've got loads of grass, the ewes are fit, leave them a bit longer. If the ewes are thin or you're short of grass, wean earlier. My sort of.
And I think, and it's also the element of making sure there's some good quality feed for those lambs to go on to, isn't there, as well? Yeah. So the earlier you wean those lambs, the more key it is for really high quality.
But quite often I find people, it depends a bit when they've cut grass, so when the aftermath's coming back in, providing some cleaner grazing without, ideally the lambs want to go onto ground that hasn't been grazed by sheep or using lambs that season. Often, obviously, that's not possible, but that ideally would be the aim. So base it on all those things, really, Liz. So I think, I guess I keep coming back to it, it's flexible depending on the year and conditions, really. Yep. But Duncan, when your lambs go on to, or your ram compare ones, are they, did you say they're going on to lays on arable ground? So basically it's parasite free pretty much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it.
Massive.
I think that's a big part of it, yeah.
Yes.
So they're going into yeah, they're very short term. It's an organic arable place, so they really if we were putting it in here, we'd probably use a bit more ryegrasses in it just to get a bit more yield out of it. But they are really looking for the nitrogen fix for the following crops, so they put in a red clover. Obviously, we do a bit of it here, which is good, but red clover is limiting in that obviously we can't use on it. So otherwise, we'd have a lot more red clover. But for the breeding flock, it's obviously up to a certain extent. You can't really use it for tupping, so it takes too much. It would take too much ground out that would need for mating ewes on to extend the red clover usage anymore.
Could you use alsite clothing instead, Duncan?
I don't know. Possibly.
No, I put that in a couple of. I put that in one new lay that I put in. And it has that same sort of upright size as red clover.
I mean, they're using some white clovers, and the performance, to be honest, the performance as far as we're concerned is good on the white clover. I think they are very conscious about having picking red clover varieties that really just throw nitrogen into the ground. So they don't really want to put anything else with it. And they're paying for the lays. So we're just very grateful.
I'm very
jealous.
Per week, obviously, but it works really well, so we don't want to rock any boats.
How low do you graze those, Duncan?
How, sorry?
How low do you take them down?
The rotation on them is very loose. It's 40 miles from home, so we can't really. It's basically just a large arable area, halved, and they will take them down to, I'd imagine, they'll not get below 2,000 kilos on an average year, but the rotation's fairly loose, though. It's probably weekly move, but obviously the parasites aren't really that big a challenge at that time. And red clover seems to limit parasites better anyway, simply because there's no ryegrass in the system. So we'd never have to dose lambs there for strongale or nematodirus. We have had occasionally had to look at coxy, but we've never had to do it. I mean, we're quite keen on our egg counts. Yeah, no, I mean, it is a really good system. It can't, you know, not everybody can replicate it, but it's not. It might become. It's not at home. Obviously, it's an 80-mile round trip if you need to do anything with them. But there might be more and more of that. Well, I know there is more and more people, arable farms, looking for those sort of things to come in. And we've been working there since 2006 with that farm. Great people to work with, you know. And I think those sort of systems are, a lot of them are about people. You know, they kind of, we want it to work for each other. So
I'll put a couple of videos on while we're chatting.
Yeah, I've requested any final questions.
Yeah. But we can chat.
I like you, Ian Sneaky, trying to get his content in the background. It's good. But yeah, and then I've just got a few points we need to say. But yeah. So this is your tall grass grazing with sheep.
It's pretty tall, yeah. I'll try and.
Oh. And there's been a few questions and in terms of keeping stock behind electric fencing. Yeah. And what's the top tips?
Well, this field, for example, is, you know, that's the one I'm moving there is 3 strands on one line, on one manual reel, which has been a complete game changer for me because it enables me to run stuff out as quickly as cattlemen. I can run about 150, 160 meters on one reel, and then the center of the field, the line that's fixed there, that would have been set out at the start of the year, and I'll just put these little breaks in. You can see one break in the background behind it, and there'll be another one in front, and I'll just leapfrog them over each day. It's pretty easy. I couldn't find the hole here, so you see me jumping around like a fool. But normally it's pretty easy. Yeah. Water's always an issue. I don't know, Duncan, how do you solve the water issue?
Pretty much the same as you. It can be a bit of a chore, but like I think the value of getting the rotations right, we've just put more and more effort into getting good water supply. We don't bury anything now. Yeah. It's all above ground because you know, it's summer, it's not going to freeze winter. Yeah. But but we're a lot keener. And water, especially if we're putting cattle in the system. If cattle don't have water midsummer, then they just are a nightmare. So it's got to work. So we're kind of being a bit more conscious about getting good water systems in. But I'm just saying about that sort of thing. That's what's good. It's good for the soul, isn't it? When you get, it's a great job to do every day. Yeah. Do that, and you're just giving them something better. And yeah. It's a very satisfying job to do, you know, when you're talking about sort of wanting to enjoy it a bit more. It's it really does cheer you up doing that job.
I think you mentioned it, Ian, but just checking. But there's a question about the question is, do you worm use less in tall grass grazing? I suppose that's also applicable for lambs.
I am worming less now. This ground is pretty sheep sick. So it is an issue here, and I also have resistance. So it's an even greater issue. I inherited resistance, and I think I've created some of my own. But I do a lot of FET counting. I'm trying to only worm I'm only worming when necessary, and it's, you know, it's quite there's a picture here. I don't know if you can see that. That's my that's how much my worm counts move during the year.
Oh blimey! And what's the top number? What does the top number look? Is it 1,000?
That was 14. That was 1,400.
Okay.
Yeah, and within that, I know from individual samples they can be much higher than that. But it's very volatile. It's all over the place. So I try and worm as little as possible. But until I've got a better system in place with possibly with cattle, and I could do with some ground elsewhere that is cleaner. It's an ongoing challenge. We're part of our Llyn breeders group. We've been doing a lot of work with worm resistance, so we're trying to breed worm resistant sheep. But it's an ongoing challenge.
Liz, may I add to that, answer that question about worming on taller grass or taller swards? Because I think often I've certainly seen this where people think worms won't be an issue because the sheep are on taller swards. In fact, what I'm particularly thinking of was actually a mixed species lay, but the lambs did have a big worm problem, and when I actually went there, part of the problem was they weren't grazing this sward evenly at all. They were grazing some areas to the floor and not touching other areas, and that's a bit the problem with sheep. So you can give them nice long covers and they still will graze right down to the ground in certain you like. So I wouldn't sort of say because you're grazing longer covers you definitely won't have a worm problem.
So that the monitoring that Ian's doing, so the vet would be looking at contamination levels, isn't it? So you're keeping a track of what's happening, and it's certainly not a you do not need to worm. You just have to keep track of what's going on.
Oh well, with this in this case, the guy I said to him kept saying we need to do some egg counts. He said, oh, they won't need egg counts doing because they're on a tall sward. And sure enough, when we did do them, they were very wormy.
I think what you were saying earlier, Harriet, about having cattle in the system does make that whole. It makes the grass quality, the parasite problem, all
so much
a lot easier.
Yes, so much easier if you've got cattle.
Yeah. I mean, I remember you giving us telling me, Elizabeth, they did have put a figure on a farm max in New Zealand about having cattle in a sheep system.
Yeah, original work came from Aberystwyth, but it's about 40 grams a day on lambs by having cattle within that rotation.
Yeah.
Which is massive. If you put 40 grams a day on 1,000 lambs, times it by 50 days, it's huge.
Yeah.
Value of those sort of gains, whatever gain gives you anything, whatever you do to your system that gives you that kind of extra.
Yes.
Is
well, I like that
genetic or, management is massive. It's massive, and it almost always outstrips what you could do by changing dates for marketing. That you can say, oh well, I'm like, because I mean, we always think, oh well, we'll get our ram campaign lambs away, great, in a high market. But if we lose 30 grams a day on them somewhere, then that market advantage has been totally stripped out of it. I use border software as well, and I think putting 30 grams a day on us gives us 30 grams a day on lambs gives us about an extra 5 tons of live weight. It's 60 days.
Yeah, it's massive. In a way, I think it sort of comes back to the whole thing, though, isn't it? Like, we don't want monocultures. Diversity is good. Diversity of species on a farm, diverse lays, everything thrives better rather than if you try and just concentrate on one thing, really.
Yeah.
I know we've just got warmed up and we could be here for another 3 hours. And anyway, I know I am sorry to interject again, but what I'd like, we just got to draw it to a close because we're just about 5 minutes past 7 now. So from each one of you, I'll go first because I'm asking this question, but what do you think is the key? That I know it's a very difficult one to summarize, but what would you encourage people to do is the most important thing for people to do looking at grazing systems? I can't even ask the question how I can answer it. I don't know. For me, I think monitoring body condition score, as ever, is really important to ensure that sheep are coping with the systems that we're putting in. And it's the simplest way just to understand how well they are dealing with that system. Harriet, what would your thoughts be?
Okay, Liz, seeing as you've almost stolen
I stole the easy one, I know.
Body condition is everything with sheep, but actually I'm going to take it back even a stage further, I think, then. Really looking at your sheep every day and noticing things like room and fill, and you can sort of notice that you put them in a field and they don't put their heads down and all graze, they're not happy, and if they don't like it, move them on. So being kind to your sheep and noticing what they're telling you, but being kind to your sheep. people sometimes ask me, like, you know, what do I think is the best system for keeping sheep? And I will say, with the people I work with, it's nothing to do with the system. It's all to do with the people and whether they are good stock people and notice and they're empathetic to their sheep. And if you're kind to them, they'll be happy and they'll do well for you.
Thank you. Duncan.
Yeah, well, like I think that's a really good point, actually. You know, the empathy of it, and just taking as much stress out of the system as you possibly could. I mean, I think body condition scoring is really important. Subdivision, we find across not just with the sheep, but like across the whole system, makes it a lot easier to run the system and plan it. And I've never felt I've had too much information. I've always felt whatever data I have, whatever I've collected, and things like reasons for mortality, growth rates, you know, all that sort of stuff is always good to have. But yeah, I like the idea of the kind thing. Yeah, I wasn't going to say it, but I think that the more stress you take out, and actually, it not that snow, but the week before was really wet and muddy, and everything looks sick, and it kind of sickens me a bit as well. I don't say that I achieve it all the time, but you know, if you're gonna keep everything full and happy, and minimize stress, then I think that's a good thing.
Thank you.
Subdivision's probably an easy one to hang your hat on. Like, I'm a big believer in it. Yeah.
Thank you. Ian, what's your
again, I would say subdivision, or break those fields up, make them smaller, make them easier to manage. It means there's much longer rest periods for the grass, so your grass will improve, and it gives you the opportunity to look at your sheep every day close up. You know, you'll see the limper at the back. You'll spot her, so that gives you a good opportunity to observe them close up all the time. Much like Duncan, I do like data. At lambing, I have a daily little fill-in form. Anything that dies, I always record a note with the ewe on the little handheld computer, on the Scion, so I know when I go back to finding out why she only got one or whatever it is, the information's there. I always have to have loads of information. I like to have a note next to her, what it died of, why did it die, even if I don't know. You know, found it dead in the corner of the field, half a leg hanging off. As long as the information's there, I can refer back to it, because I won't remember what 2, 3, 6, 7 did at 8 months later, but I'll need to know, because I want to know why she's only got one, and am I culling her, or is there a reason why she's only got one, or whatever it is. And I just think more and more information enables you to make the right choices about building the flock that I want, that can cope with this farm. I'm trying to be kind to the sheep. I'm probably not as kind as I should be. I'll be honest. I push them quite hard, but I'm pushing them quite hard to get to a point where they can deal with the system. And I'm sort of, it's moving there reasonably quickly. Just losing a few passengers along the way.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to wrap it up really. So brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. Really interesting. I'm sorry for those who had to do something at 7 that we just went a little bit over. The other point I should have said is that I think what is a theme that comes through all of them is about sort of planning ahead, monitoring, planning, isn't it? It's about putting a bit more information and decision making into the farming system. And as I mentioned, plan B is not as simple as ringing a merchant, which is a lot of systems rely on. That if they run out of grass, that's the route out. For these sort of systems, we do need to think of probably 6 months ahead of ourselves all the time. So it's thinking of different ways of doing that. Software and all various things can help. The thing just to be also aware of that I'm involved in another PFLA webinar on the 3rd of March, where we are going to be doing a bit more, quite a lot more conversation about grazing systems. So some of the questions that came through that we didn't get a chance to answer in detail, we'll have an opportunity on that evening. So that's the 3rd of March. But yeah, just last thing, just to say thank you very much to Harriet, Ian and Duncan for this evening, and Fidelity for helping me with the questions, and and also with the standards really. So again, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, feel free to bring any questions along to the 3rd of March. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.